Do you ever think about time, that unstoppable force, slowly driving towards chaos and entropy? That endless procession of tomorrows, like a glacier, inexhaustibly forcing us all towards oblivion. I'm making a day-night cycle. Let's get into this. Lots of games nowadays have day-night cycles, but very few of them actually do anything with it other than just making things darker and or lighter. I wanted Noia to actually have a day-night cycle where there's a night and a twilight and a day. There was a game that I played a long time ago called Aeon, and they actually did something pretty cool with their day-night cycle that you don't see very often, and that's where day and night actually affects what different kinds of monsters can spawn. If you were in a graveyard at one time or during the day, then nothing would be there. But if you were there at night, then ghosts would spawn, and that's pretty cool. But I wanted to take it a step further and maybe make it something where even special dungeons and stuff can spawn. Only at night. And so, yeah, that's what we're going to try and do. When I first started thinking of making a day-night cycle, I wasn't exactly sure how to go about this. I think I was originally just going to take a few arbitrary colors and lerp between them, and then try and pick what types of day those colors would be prevalent. And the more and more I thought about it, the more I realized that I really didn't understand or couldn't visualize the math in my head of how this was going to happen. And I just ended up Googling it. Yeah, Unity day-night cycle. Oh, that was easy. Watching the YouTube video by the channel Probably Spoony taught me about gradients, where at one end of the gradient is 0, and on the other side of the gradient is 1. I decided to make each in-game day one real-life hour. So at one end of the gradient would be 0 seconds, and on the other end would be 3,600 seconds. And there's 360 degrees in a circle.
Coincidence? I think not!
So I would be able to rotate my sunlight 360 degrees depending on the time of day. So just like Probably Spoony did, we're going to make a lighting preset. What's cool about this though is I can make multiples of these for different areas throughout the game. So different continents can have completely different lighting setups from each other. I think that's going to be really awesome. Now, for the gradients themselves, I had disabled the directional and fog color in the code, and I spent, admittedly, way more time than was necessary getting the colors what I thought was right in the gradient editor here. But, I mean, eventually I did settle on something that I did like. Now, in his video, Spoony uses a 1 second to 1 hour time, so his in-game days last only 24 seconds. For example purposes, mine are going to last 1 hour, is going to be 1 day in-game. So while I know I'm going to have to retime that eventually, initially here I'm just going to use his code one for one and just make sure it works for me and what I need it to do in-game. Okay, we're going to see it in game for the first time, and oh, that's very blue. Okay, well, oh, then noon is incredibly bright. Okay, so we're going to have to tune the colors a bit still. Now, while I was fine-tuning the gradient colors and brightness settings, I ran into a major problem. And that is that the shadows cast by my objects here are actually passing behind each other. That bridge is supposed to disappear when a player goes underneath it, and the shadow from the tower is also going underneath it, and that looks absolutely terrible. This turned out to be an issue with the two shaders that I used for the bridge and for the tower. I actually used separate shaders, and this was a major problem because I worked on this for a long time to get those to work initially. I spent a lot more time trying to figure out how to fix this, and I landed on another YouTube video. This YouTuber's name is TaroDev. Now, TaroDev managed to accomplish what I was never able to a year back, and that was to migrate my sprite shader from the original Unity render engine over to the universal render pipeline. The universal render pipeline is the better way of doing things, and it looks better now, but I already had a standard shader that worked, or at least it used to. With this new problem, now I was much more inclined to upgrade my project to the universal render pipeline. The problem is, this broke a lot of other things in rendering in the project that I had to fix before continuing with the day-night cycle. The main thing that upgrading to the universal render pipeline broke was actually the post effects layer. My vignette and bloom and fog all just didn't work anymore. So I had to redo all of that from scratch. And in doing so, I also noticed that everything was just way more blown out and bright at the same time. So I had to also redo the entire gradient for the day-night cycle that I had just spent so long perfecting. I did learn a new trick though that allows me to change variables on a script and have it immediately affect the editor though, so I was actually able to very quickly test gradient color scales and see what they looked like in-game using the time of day slider, even though I hadn't actually started the game client. So that made things a lot more efficient. While messing around with the lights, I noticed something that was point lights, or, well, any light source that is not a directional light source like the sun, do not cast shadows. So I don't think this is going to be a huge problem. I don't think people are going to nitpick over it that much, but it is just something that I noticed that unless you're using a global directional light, your objects aren't going to cast shadows. Now that we got that all sorted out, it's time to actually get the raw time of day data down to the player. So we're going to add a player time of day class to the player that will sync down that variable for the time of day to the player client, which will then affect how the ambient color of the client and the direction of the global sun light face. And if I did everything correctly, this will work first try. God damn it. What the hell did I do wrong? Oh, I see what I did wrong. New DateTime Object isn't going to give me anything. That's a blank object. I need to get the current time of the day with DateTime now. Okay, with that fixed, now the shadows are updating every second. The problem is they're updating every second, instead of a smooth motion that travels with the sun. Now, we're going to go back to our lerp function, which is going to interpolate the movement of the sun between the previous second and the current second. That should give us some smooth looking shadows. Oh god! Something is clearly wrong with my lerp function here, but it slows down, which means it is interpolating before I know what's going wrong. The problem here is that I'm interpolating between old and new time, and when the client first starts, old time is 0, and the current time is somewhere in the millions of seconds. So it rushes to catch up causing the sun to blast through several eons of days instantly. The easy way to fix this is just to set a flag where if the difference between old time and new time is too great, then just set the time exactly where it needs to be. Now that looks a lot smoother. It's still pixelated, well, because it's a pixelated game, but now it's moving properly with the sun. Now, as I said before, I wanted to actually make spawn rules for certain monsters where they can only exist at certain times of day, otherwise they despawn. Well, now I gotta create that rule set for them. I threw together an enum with different popular times of day that I thought would be in use, and then I had to essentially calculate where those times of days correlate to how the color gradient looks and figure out what the numerical value of that time of day is. Now we get to make a new monster who is going to be affected by these time of day shifts. I've got this little ghost sprite sheet here. We're gonna slice it up and add it to a brand new animation controller and throw it into a brand new mob. With our new spooky ghost in place, let's go see how it acts. It is nighttime, and it is inactive. Okay. I'm playing on both the server and the client at the same time, so mobs don't actually despawn, but the mob is inactive, which means it's not working. The problem? I was using a not operator when I should have been using an else operator. So I have to redo this whole thing and get rid of all the exclamation points and add else to every single if statement. Okay, let's try this again. Oh, our spooky ghost is coming to us, it seems. So that's cool. So now I'm going to alter my computer's time, and that was odd. The time shifted, and it definitely worked, but I didn't shift the time. The ghost despawned when day happened, but I only respawned too, so that's working. But I didn't change the time. Turns out my alert function here to interpolate between times of day is not set nearly sensitive enough if the disparity between old and new is too far. And so whenever the new day flips over, it rewinded the sun all the way back to 0, rather than just switching it from 11:59 p.m. to midnight. Now if I'm in game and I change my system clock from, say, 11:50 p.m. to 10 a.m., it doesn't rewind the sun, it just sets the time appropriately. While I was making the spooky ghost, I thought, why not brush up on my tile palette skills and I can make a happy little graveyard for the ghost to live in for now. So I did. It took me a second to remember how to use tiles again, but I got there eventually. Just a couple of happy little headstones just lying around. Beautiful. Now, because I'd actually made changes to the terrain, I had to regenerate what's called the Navnish in Unity. This is something in Unity that makes monsters' pathing function, and it's fantastic that it exists natively because I wouldn't be able to figure this stuff out. The blue highlighted areas being where Unity has determined that the path is clear and mobs can walk there. And now that our graveyard is complete, we can give our ghost a couple of happy little friends. Now we get to see if it works in game. It's twilight, which is not nighttime, so ghosts don't get to spawn. Let's change the time to something that qualifies as night. And the time instantly changed and the ghosts instantly spawned. So there we go. Now let's see if they despawn properly when it is daytime. Change the time again. And they're gone. Fantastic. And all that's left now is the clock.
It doesn't tell time?
No.
I found a simple vector graphic online and modified it to suit my needs. And all that's left to do was get it in game and get it to rotate with the proper time of day. And at the end of the day, when everything is said and done, what are we left with? A day-night cycle, a spooky ghost, a clock, and a happy little graveyard. See you next time.